Real estate is a lot like war. Consider this. We have an area of operation. We have a set amount of resources. We have the presence of both friendly forces and opposition. We have a mission, and we have set rules of engagement. The following short video breaks down how a combat veteran like myself applies combat theory to real estate. This is Tactical Real Estate Advice with Operation Red Dot. Let's dive in. Let's talk about the concept of our topic today. How do we treat a white-hot market as a buyer? First, let's talk about the context of what a white-hot market even is. Typically, we have three different major types of markets. We have a seller's market, we have a buyer's market, and what I call a neutral market, which is both equal a buyer's and seller's market. Now, that neutral market means that supply and demand is equalized. You'll hear me talk about the scales of justice as an analogy pretty frequently, and this is a really good example to use that analogy. If we have the scales of justice and we have a seller's market on one end and a buyer's market on the other, a neutral market means that we're dead center in the middle. A white-hot market means supply and demand is way off kilter. And if you've bought a house in the last couple of years, you've probably been in a market that's pretty far off kilter, especially in my market, which is the Puget Sound of Washington State. So we have way too many buyers and way not enough houses. So supply and demand is way off kilter. So we are in a white-hot market right now where every house is typically getting, 5 to 10 offers. Everybody is really competitive. And so how we treat a white-hot market is we come in swinging hard. We have to understand coming into a market like this that there are no discounts, there are no deals. Sellers have no reason to take less than the market value of their property. So we need to come into this mentality knowing that we need to come in with our highest and best. Let's dive into the 7 tips today that are going to talk about how to make your offer more competitive in a white-hot market. Tip number 1, let's talk about pre-inspections. Now, a normal deal is going to be us writing an offer contingent on an inspection, meaning that we're going to write the offer, we're going to get it accepted by the seller, and then we're going to move to have it inspected. And if we find something on the inspection that we don't like, then we're going to back out of that deal and we're going to go find another house. A pre-inspection, in my opinion, does it the right way from the beginning. We're not going to write our offer contingent on the inspection. We're going to get the seller to agree to let us inspect the house before they have even seen our offer, because our intent is we're going to write that offer based on the inspection report that we found. So a pre-inspection comes with some risks and some rewards. Let's talk about the rewards first. If we pre-inspect a property, we don't have to have an inspection contingency in our offer, which makes us way more competitive than any offer that is going to be a big question mark in the seller's mind, because that buyer is still going to have an inspection. So if we don't have an inspection contingency, then we don't have to have that contingency present in our offer. That's going to make us a lot more competitive. However, that strategy doesn't come without risks. Let's talk about the biggest one. So let's assume that the seller agrees to let us pre-inspect the property. Well, we have the pre-inspection, we write our offer based on that pre-inspection, and the seller still doesn't accept our offer. What that ultimately means is we just spent $400 to $600 and we're not going to get that money back, and the seller still didn't accept our offer. So now we're back to the drawing board because some other offer that was even more competitive than ours still beat us out. That is a price that we have to pay. And if we're really dead set on buying that house, pre-inspection is a strategy that I like to use pretty frequently. It's just something that you need to understand the risk going into it. Option number 2 is a non-refundable earnest money deposit. Now, an earnest money deposit does a couple of different things. It tells our seller that we're serious. So if we have a $500 earnest money deposit versus another one of our buyers, or another one of our competing offers has a $3,000 earnest money deposit, the seller is going to feel a lot more comfortable with the $3,000 earnest money deposit, because if they default on that contract, the seller gets to keep that earnest money. Now, if we come in straight out the gate and we say our earnest money is non-refundable, meaning that for any reason, no matter what, the seller gets to keep that money. Meaning if we back away from this deal for any reason, the seller gets to keep that earnest money. Now, even if we make it non-refundable, the earnest money is still going to go towards your closing costs. So it's not like you're losing that money. It's just basically giving the seller a contingency that says, if we as the buyer walk away from this transaction for any reason, they get to keep that money. And it does give the seller a little bit more skin in the game. Tip number 3 is keeping our timelines tight. And let's talk about the 2 timelines that us at the buyer really have control over. One of those is the closing date. Now, in Washington State at least, and you're going to want to talk to your agent if you're outside of Washington, normal transactions take anywhere from 21 to 30 days on average. So if we're coming in asking for a 60-day close period or a 45-day close period, that's not as competitive as we want. In most cases, sellers want a quick close. They want it to be done in a normal amount of time, which is, to be really competitive, is going to be 21 days. You're going to want to talk with your lender to make sure that that's feasible. And then the other timeline that we can control is the inspection contingency period. If we're having one of those, this would assume that we're not doing a pre-inspection. So on our contracts in the Northwest MLS, it defaults to 10 days. I have never in the last 4 years seen a contract that includes a 10-day inspection period. There's really no reason for it. We don't need 10 days. Most home inspection companies can be out at the property within, on average 48 to 72 hours. So 3 days really should be the max that we're asking for to remain competitive. Now this next one, tip number 4, is really important. Now, we as the buyers have never met the seller. We don't know exactly what the background of their situation is. We don't know if there's anything special about their situation. So this is recon for the seller's needs. And this can really only be done by your agent. The agent should be calling the listing agent and asking them if there's anything special that seller might be looking for, if there's anything special that their situation might call for. For all you know, it may be January 1st and they have a new job that they're starting on March 1st and they need to move February 20th. And that's the closing date that they think is the most ideal for their situation. Well, other agents that don't ask that question are not going to have that little bit of intel. But if I as your agent calls the listing agent and asks if there's anything special, and I now get that little piece of intel that says February 20th is the ideal closing date, then we're going to write our offer to match what the seller needs. And that can make a really big difference. Most of these little tidbits of intel are not going to be listed on the ad. They're not going to be told to your agent. And so a little bit of recon and a little bit of due diligence can go a long way. Let's talk about tip number 5, the 22 AD, or otherwise known as the additional down. Now, this doesn't work for everybody, but it can be a very, very powerful tool. And what this deals with is a low appraisal. Let me give you an example. We have a house that's listed currently for $300,000, but there's multiple offers. They've got 10 offers at the table. Because of the low purchase price, we've got a lot of competition to deal with. So, being the competitive buyers that we are, we go all the way up to $320,000. But we still have a check and balance of the appraisal. And the seller knows this. The listing agent knows this. We know this. And so we do need to be conscious of that. And so if we have a little bit of cash to play with in the background, or you've saved money in the background and you've got some money to put towards this, a 22 AD or an additional down clause allows us to guarantee money in the case of a low appraisal. So let's go back to our example. The house was listed at $300,000. We offered at $320,000. But through the appraisal came back at $315,000. So we're $5,000 light. Well, the seller is going to want you to pay the difference because you offered the $320,000. But if we offered a $5,000 22 AD or additional down, then that guarantees to the seller before we even get to the appraisal that in the case of a low appraisal, we are going to pay $5,000 difference to make up that difference. So in the case of a $310,000 appraisal, where we're $10,000 light, this would still guarantee the seller $5,000 in a low appraisal. So if the property appraised at $310,000, but we offered $320,000, then our new offer price would be $315,000. So we're still getting a deal. but the sellers are still making up a little bit of the difference in a low appraisal situation. So now this obviously only works if you have cash in the background to play with, and you're going to want to talk with your agent about that. Let's talk about tip number 6, the seller love letter. Now, this is a tool that I really love, especially for active duty military or veteran personnel, because this is a great opportunity for us to differentiate ourselves from our competing offers, but also emotionally connect with the seller where we've never had the opportunity to meet with them before. So we don't know them, they don't know us, and we have to assume, because all of the contracts are identical, that if the seller gets 5 offers for their property, every single one of them is going to look exactly the same. A seller love letter offers us the opportunity to emotionally connect with that seller by writing a cover page that's going to go on top of that offer, that's going to give the sellers a little bit of context into who we are, and it allows us to give them a little bit of information about what we really loved about the house. Seller love letters in the past have looked a lot like, "Hi, my name is this. I'm an active duty service member. We really love your house, and we have 2 small children that are really going to build a lot of memories here. We can tell you really cared for the house, and we want to continue that and take care of your house as well." That's just a very rough ballpark example of what one of those letters might look like. But ultimately, the letter is meant to bridge that emotional gap and make us more real than just a contract and a piece of paper. And in some cases, that can make a big difference. What I tell my buyers is this is going to give us about a 10 to 15% chance of getting the offer over somebody else because we made that emotional connection. So it's obviously not a guarantee, but it really can make a really big difference. Let's talk about the final one. Our tip number 7 is the escalation clause. Now, this is funny because in talking with a lot of agents, you find a lot of agents who either love the escalation clause or hate the escalation clause. I'm in the boat that says I love it, but there are some caveats. So let's talk about what an escalation clause is. Let's go back to our example from earlier. We have a house that's listed at $300,000. We don't exactly know where our competing offers are going to be, but we know what our maximum allowable offer is, and that's $320,000. Now, we don't want to pay $320,000 unless we absolutely have to. An escalation clause basically says we're going to offer you your $300,000, but we will beat any offer in between $300,000 and $320,000 by $1,000 up to that $320,000 point. So if our highest competing offer is $310,000, then we would only have to pay $311,000. Now, the risk to an escalation clause is it ultimately shows our hand. We're telling the seller up front that, hey, we're willing to go up to $320,000 for this house, but only if you have another legitimate offer that goes up to that point. So it is possible that the seller in that point could strike that addendum and just counter us back at $320,000. That is a risk that we're going to have to take. So ultimately, an escalation addendum gives us a contingency that allows us to escalate our price in a multiple offer situation. Now, agents will argue that it completely shows our hand, and that's not what we want to do for the seller. And in a neutral market or a buyer's market, I could not agree more. But we're talking about strategies to get our offer accepted in a white hot market. I'm okay showing our hand in a super competitive situation because the sellers are not likely to counter our offer or any offer. The sellers are more likely to look at all of the offers that they've amassed for their property and pick the best one. And so we want to come in with our highest and best offer. So if we're showing the seller our highest and best offer, I'm okay with that. That's okay, because I want the seller to say yes. At the end of the day, if we're writing multiple offers on multiple properties and we keep getting beat out, we don't have the luxury of trying to inch our way down as much as possible. We want to come in swinging with our absolute highest and best. So those are our 7 tips. Now let's talk about how to execute those 7 tips. The execution of these 7 tips is quite simple. We need to keep in mind that not all of these are going to fit your situation. Some of them are dependent on your finances. Some of them are dependent on your timeline. Some of them are dependent ultimately just on whatever your current situation is. So the best way to execute any one of these 7 are very simple. A, you need to know that they exist. So when you're writing offers on a property, reference this video. But number two is you need to talk with your agent about which ones of these actually fits your situation. How many of these are going to be able to be executed in the contract that you're writing right now? Now, if you can execute all of them, you're going to be ultra competitive, no question. If you can execute one of them, you're going to be that much more competitive than your competition who isn't using any of these 7 strategies. So how many of these can you use in your specific situation? Talk with yourself and talk with your agent about what's possible. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you got a lot of value out of this, and I hope you can use these tools to go execute to get the seller to say yes to your offer right now. You can find us on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, or most importantly, go to operationreddot.com for more videos and more information about who we are and what we do. Just so you know, the vision for Operation Red Dot is very simple. We exist to guide the military and their local communities to achieve financial freedom through real estate. So, do you know anybody in Washington State or anybody coming to Washington State? Share this video and share operationreddot.com. We'll see you on the next video. Good luck.